Senator Smith on debates.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Honourable Senators, I rise today to speak to Bill C-45. Since the bill was passed in the other place, we have heard significant concerns from many of our colleagues of all parties and groups here in the Senate, representing all corners of the country. And, fairly stated, they reflect the wide range of opinions held by Canadians. I think this has been a good and worthy exchange, as what we have heard will inform the work that remains before us and demonstrates the seriousness this matter requires. It is my goal today to be faithful to my role as senator in this chamber, as a member of the official opposition, and to my obligation as leader of the opposition. At its core, this means our work must strive to ensure that all views contrary to those of the government be fully voiced and considered. We must be a voice for those Canadians who have significant and valid concerns about the policy choice their government is making. Comme j'ai souligné au début de mes remarques à la réunion de committee.
As I said at the beginning of my comments at the meeting of the Committee of the Whole on February 6, Conservative senators will study Bill C-45 seriously and with the attention it deserves.
5 areas of particular concern to Canadians and cite general elements where the government appears to be less than fulsome in its consideration of matters arising from their policy choices. Policy choices that they themselves advance as being in the interest of public safety and driven by a central commitment to harm reduction. Public safety and harm reduction is their standard, and the Senate is here to determine if that standard is met, and if found otherwise, advise and amend the legislation accordingly. Firstly, children and youth. As I've listened to my colleagues, I conclude that one of the more commonly held concerns deals with the impact that the government's policy approach, including legalization, will have on the health and well-being of our children and youth. Over the past few weeks, senators have received hundreds of letters and emails from concerned Canadians who wonder why the government is, in their view, putting the health and safety of our children at risk with this legislation. En conséquence, il nous sera utile de mettre en place des critères d'intérêt.
As a result, it would be useful to establish public interest criteria applicable to the government's choices to determine whether it's protecting our children and youth, as it claims.
Attention to children living in homes where, once this bill is passed, absent fear of significant legal penalties, there is likely to be increased direct and indirect exposure to cannabis. Whether it is consumption or homegrown plants, children are not afforded any protection from adults legally smoking up and growing plants. Some may be likely to suggest that people smoke and grow now prior to the introduction of this bill. I'm certain that this is true, but they do so facing legal consequences that will be overturned if this bill is made law in its current form. So I share the concern that, having made great efforts over many decades to protect Canadians, particularly children, from the unwanted impacts of secondhand tobacco smoke, we ought to make extra efforts to not set back all of that progress by legalization without adequate protection. The argument that the provinces will put in place rules for protection persists in our discussion. As of today, however, this remains unclear. Preparations to sell the product has taken place. However, they are unprepared to protect to people who will be impacted and without any protection, not now and maybe not for a long time, perhaps never. This issue needs to be addressed. With regard to youth, health professionals have told us that the brain continues to develop until the age of 25. Yet, this legislation sets the legal age limit at consumption for 18. The Canadian Medical Association has stated the following, and I quote, "We still want to set the age at 21 and maybe 25 because the damage done to the brain will be permanent." End of quote. Si le cerveau se développe jusqu'à l'âge de 25 ans, alors que
If the brain develops until the age of 25, well, it might be a good idea to follow the opinion of the Canadian Medical Association, which wishes to increase the age of cannabis consumption to protect the youth, the brains of thousands of young people.
Shifting the focus, we have also heard concerns on the government's efforts aimed at prevention, education, and protection of health and well-being. If legalization brings greater exposure and signals normalizing social acceptance, it then demands a corresponding harm reduction and public safety effort. We have seen responses from other jurisdictions that lead me to believe that the implementation of legalization so far is too advanced in comparison to prevention and education efforts. In other words, lots of words, but not enough execution. At the Committee of the Whole last month, the Minister of Health mentioned the government is investing $46 million in public education and that the national program should be launched in March. I have yet to see this key national public education advertising campaign, nor any indication that we will in the near future. I did send a letter this week to the Minister of Health asking her that question, because I did ask it at the Committee of the Whole. Le ministère de Santé a dit en comité.
The Minister of Health said in Committee of the Whole, and I quote, "We've obtained a lot of information from our counterparts in Colorado. They told us that if they had to start the exercise from the beginning again, they would certainly ensure that they had an awareness-raising campaign for the general public established before the legalization of the substance."
To do it over again, we put more money and have a bigger program. Well, Minister Petitpas-Taylor said that this is exactly what is being done. I would argue that this is not the case. We are not ensuring that public awareness is in place before the product is legalized. How can it be in place when the national education campaign has yet to launch, even though we are a mere few weeks away from legalization? Dr. Mark Ware, co-chair of Ottawa's Marijuana Task Force, has also stated, and I quote, "Canada should immediately boost spending on intensive public education and research into the impacts of marijuana and not wait until 2018, end of quote. Fellow senators, please allow me to take time to look at the educational timeline, as I find it very troublesome. It is a known fact that youth will better receive information from trusted mentors, such as teachers, coaches, and parents. It appears that the educational program targeting youth will not be prepared in time for this year's school cycle. Well, when does school end? School ends in June. Well, if it doesn't start, the training doesn't start before June, what happens during the summer? The kids play and fall asleep, and we all fall asleep during summer vacations. So this means that our young generations will not be taught about the implications and dangers of consuming marijuana in schools prior to its legalization. The lack of planning by the government on the educational campaign is deeply concerning. While the recent budget announced funding amounting to $18 million, that's on top of the 46, in the next fiscal year, and Senator Petitpas was very clear in her definition of the percentage of dollars spent in Canada. It'll be much less. It will only kick in after marijuana legalization. It would seem to me that the Minister of Health is not taking the lessons learned from Colorado to heart, nor the advice from her own task force. If she were, we would have had a national program launched and underway months, if not years ago. The Liberal Party included marijuana legislation as a central point in their election platform. The groundwork on educating the public, and especially our youth, should have begun as soon as the current government took office, but it was not. And in their neglect to do so, the government commitment to harm reduction approach must be called into question. Public safety. Public safety is another area of common concern. Whether it is the government's decision to focus first on the legalization of smoking products, products that are banned in some jurisdiction where other forms are accepted, or the absence of THC regulations, there is ample cause for concern. Selon la Fédération des médecins spécialistes du Québec,
according to the Quebec Federation of Medical Specialists, the THC rate in the marijuana consumed today is much higher, and that can lead to an increased addiction risk among consumers. Why doesn't this bill address the THC limits in order to protect the brain development of future generations?
See, regulation now. It will be especially important to set limits on potency for edibles, concentrates, and marijuana-infused products, as we have seen in the case of Colorado. Honourable Senators, would it not have been prudent to learn from Colorado's experience and set clear potency limits now? Perhaps, for that matter, legalize and strictly regulate these forms while maintaining a ban on smoking marijuana? In this case, we have only a commitment to introduce regulations on edibles and extractives at some ambiguous later date. It seems a step backwards, or at least a misplaced sense of priority. A rigorous and comprehensive regulatory framework for public safety that enables this bill is clearly needed. The government, having chosen not to follow the normal regulatory development process and cutting corners along the way, will only present the final regulations after the bill becomes law. And I do refer back to question period this week when I asked Minister Bryson, why are you not putting this into the pre-period? He didn't answer the question. It was the most interesting answer I've ever heard. I couldn't understand a goddamn word that was said. Excuse my language. It's unparliamentary, and I realize that, but at the same time, we are citizens of Canada, and we're fighting for citizens of Canada. It will not, in a public and transparent manner, and following their own rules, pre-publish and consult on the final form of regulations. This, to many of us, is an alarming approach to a matter that the government claims is driven by public safety and harm reduction. Where is the harm reduction and cutting corners on regulations? Enforcement. I would like to speak to the black market, traffic, and marijuana. I will reiterate what several of my colleagues and RCMP witnesses at committee have already stated. This legislation will not eliminate the black market as this government so adamantly claims it will. With the delay in bringing edibles into the fold and leaving other marijuana-infused products outside of the legal framework, this bill will ensure that black market continues. Home and outdoor grow will also fuel the black market, especially since the height restriction on plants in homes was removed. My goodness, those plants are growing. As my colleague Senator Vern White has said, the only way someone under 18 years of age can buy marijuana under this legislation is illegal, both in activity and in product. Imagine looking out across a classroom of 12 to 13-year-old children, all permitted to have 5 grams of pot on their desks. I share the concern that there is a flaw in this legislation. Why have we left it to the provinces and territories to prohibit youth possession when we can demonstrate leadership and do it at a federal level? Why youth under 18 can possess up to 5 grams of dried cannabis without offense in this legislation? It is a criminal offense to sell or give marijuana to youth under the age of 18. I have not heard much from the government other than leaving it up to the province and territories about what strategies have been examined to minimize the likelihood that youth will be able to access the black market.
Furthermore, we know that foreign tax havens help finance Canadian marijuana companies. In recent weeks, a number of members of the media in Quebec revealed that nearly half of the 86 companies receiving a permit from Health Canada to grow marijuana are funded through tax havens, often used by organized crime to launder money.
The government mused aloud about the changes they intend to make. I thought they had all of this thought through. This is clearly not the case. This brings me to how this legislation will introduce new judicial burdens, despite claims from the government that the legislation will lessen them. Throughout the study of Bill C-46 at the Standing Senate Committee on Legal and Constitutional Affairs, experts have repeatedly stated that this legislation is ahead of the science. There is currently no government-approved roadside testing technology for marijuana impairment. So what does that mean for the officers who are supposed to implement this on the streets? The committee has also heard from witnesses that there will be constitutional challenges by people who are facing the consequences of having a criminal record for drug offenses without scientific certainty. This is the opposite impact of what the government is intending. Indigenous impacts. The Minister of Health highlighted that she had heard from our Indigenous communities that they also want to ensure that the programs are going to be currently sensitive and meet their needs. We have heard assurances that the consultations have been held that meet the legal and constitutional obligations given to our special relationship with Canada's First Nations people. I have examined the record and have come to the view that what has been done and what the government plans to do fall well short of the mark. What I hear leaves me unconvinced as to the government's intentions. I'm especially concerned with the impact on the health for Indigenous people in Canada. Over the last month, Senator Patterson has spent hours traveling and discussing this legislation with elders, leaders, and concerned citizens all over the far north, and the response has been clear. Communities are not prepared to implement this legislation, as they are not receiving the necessary supports for addiction and mental health treatment. Malheureusement, au Canada, le suicide, c'est les jeunes.
Unfortunately, the suicide rate among First Nations youth aged 15 to 24 is 5 to 6 times higher than the rate among non-Aboriginal people. In communities where depression and suicide are already all too common, I fear that this bill is not making the necessary efforts to help Aboriginal populations.
5 minutes to make a speech, hopefully, that makes some sense. Honourable Senators, we know that there are many outstanding concerns, and I appreciate the opportunity to speak with you today. The bill's goal to protect youth in its current form is failing. The failure, and this failure, will be at the expense of irreparable damage to children and youth, in particular, society in general. Comme les sénateurs, nous devons accorder la priorité.
As senators, we must give priority to the health and safety of Canadians. According to the data that we've seen up to now, without considering the unintended consequences that we've seen elsewhere, it is clear that this bill does raise very serious concerns.
Steamroll ahead, refusing to listen to the recommendation of medical experts, law enforcement experts, and even other jurisdictions that have legalized marijuana. It is up to the Senate to demonstrate that there needs to be greater regard for the consequences, a greater attention paid to managing the risks and concerns that have been identified, and serious action on public education. Fellow Senators, as members of the upper chamber, let us be faithful to our role as sober second thought and collectively make valuable contributions in the best interest of all Canadians. This is what Canadians expect us to do. If the key issues I've raised are not addressed, this bill will in fact not protect Canadians, and we will have failed Canadians. Et n'oublions pas que notre cause commune est fondée.
And let us not forget that our common cause is based on the difference that we can and should make by uniting our efforts to protect Canadian families and communities as we continue to study this bill.
Senator Lankin, a question? Senator Smith, you'll take.
Thank you very much. I have a couple questions, but I want to begin seeking clarification. I agree with a lot of the concerns that you've raised, by the way. I did, however, hear you say that the law would prohibit, would permit a group of young people to have 5 grams of pot. I'm not disputing what you say on their desk, that's not the issue, but that it would permit them. I didn't understand the bill that way. I'm wondering now, because Senator Boisvenu said the same thing, am I misunderstanding something? Is that accurate, what you said to us?
Senator Smith.
Senators, make sure that I'll take your question under advisement, and I'll double check it. Just from the information that I'd received is that there would be an availability of children 12 to 17 to be able to have actual marijuana in their hands. Excuse me? No, I'm not being critical. Did you have something to add? So My understanding is some of the provinces are stepping up to disallow children to have some of these, or young people to have some of these options. And the point in here was, well, let's make sure that if there's any confusion or conflict between the provinces and the federal body, let's get the federal body to take the initiative. Let's not push on the provinces what can be done at a federal level. What leadership should we be taking? Because it's easy to pass it on to someone else. And I have to tell you, in life, in my short life, which is getting longer, hopefully, is that it really bothers me when people in authority pass the buck to someone else and say, you do it. Because it's not for them to do it, it's for us to do it.
Senator Lankin.
Thank you. My understanding is that it doesn't permit them. In fact, it still is not permissible. But if they are found to have that amount, they will be treated under a juvenile system or provincial offenses system, and that they won't be criminalized. They won't have a record that will follow them, and they won't go to jail at that age group. That's my understanding. You said something different. I just wanted to make sure that we're talking on the same facts. The other thing that I find, difficult in exercising judgment, that's our job, but the conflict in views that come forward from professional organizations. So again, you and Senator Boisvenu referred, I believe, to the CMA and their view that the age limit should be higher, and I think he said a compromise of 21, you said 21 to 25. I just wondering if you're aware, I was reading just this morning from a blog from the Canadian Association of Pediatric Centers and the pediatric chairs of universities who were here on the Hill giving a presentation, a panel presentation in sponsorship by Senator O. And they said, with respect to age, and these are two very credible medical organizations dealing with youth, they said that the consensus was that age 18, or the same age as alcohol, because in some provinces it's 19, was preferable from a harm reduction point of view. And I think that means being able to get in and do something, with people, understanding that they're probably going to smoke, let's get it regulated, quality controlled, and all of that. That is not disputing the effect on the brain. It's saying a better way to be able to deal with it is through a harm reduction approach. I just wondered if you could comment on that with respect to the age preference.
People that you saw who were doctors, and each doctor was pretty consistent in saying that it should be more than 18 years old. It should be between either 21 to 25 because of the impact of development on the brain. And then, of course, people say publicly, well, because of the liquor laws, we need to put it at 18 or 19. I understand that argument. I guess the point that frustrates me is let's look at other elements, and some of us in our families have it, where we have people, grandmothers, aunts, and uncles who were alcoholics and pass that gene on to their children. And then grandchildren now are alcoholics. And the biggest growth with that type of addiction issue is with young girls 18 to 35 years old. I have a couple of my friends whose daughters are 35 years old who are binge drinkers. If you've never seen someone who becomes addicted by being a binge drinker, I mean, I cry every time I see these people because they've been gone for treatment now for over 2 years. Their families have spent over $200,000 just to get them through. So the issue of age and doctors, when I hear 5 doctors say consistently the same thing, whether it's 21 or 25, what they're saying is the range that we should have is between 21 and 25. The issue is, who has the political courage to try to implement that because of the factors that we say, well, kids are getting booze at 18 and 19. Well, God, I got beer when I was 13. We used to give somebody $5 and they would buy us 2 beers. We'd have 2 beers and smoke a cigarette, and then, we'd go home and my parents would say, have you had anything to drink? But guess what we learned? We learned that if you do it too often, you're not going to feel good. And we were lucky. I didn't have in my family anyone who had any alcoholic tendencies. So I learned the hard way. So is that the same thing that'll happen with marijuana? But more importantly, if we have scientific evidence that brain development is affected 21 to 25, then I think we should listen to that. It is important that we listen to that, as opposed to say, oh no, well, because we can get booze at 18 and 19, let's leave it at 18 or 19. I'm not sure it's the right thing to do.
Senator Lankin?
One last question, and again, I think the point you raise is something that we should explore very seriously at committee. I will just let you know that the blog from these two organizations refers to that meeting and says that one of the recommendations the panelists talked about around minimum age, that the consensus that alignment with legal age of alcohol consumption was most desirable from a harm reduction perspective. So I don't know how it went from the meeting to this, but I think this issue of harm reduction and where it fits in and to what degree is important for us to explore, because I've seen in terms of treatment of alcoholism the same thing, harm reduction approach. The last question I want to ask you then is, I appreciate your commitment that people are going to be digging into these issues at committee, and I likewise want to do that. And I just want to ask you, does that mean that you'll vote in principle in favor of this bill to get it to committee?
Up because I have been very direct. I have a great relationship with the leader of the government because I respect him. I know he's got a tough job to do, and I think hopefully he has some respect for what we're trying to do. I'll put it on the table right now, is that we talked about it, about that particular subject. Many of us have very strong feelings about this legislation, and if I can summarize, it's quite simple, is that there are a lot of holes in this legislation. So you have two choices in your mindset: is do you do more to try to make it acceptable or better, or do you make a decision at this particular time? Now, we're in the opposition, and opposition's job is to really look at legislation, and if you don't agree with it, you oppose it. We're in opposition. And so in this particular case, asking me if I vote for it, I would just say that what's most important is for the government and the people that believe in the government's direction to vote very strongly with their hearts in favor of doing this, if this is what you want to do. This is what the obligation of the government leader is to the people on the other side and this side of the table. Okay? Our role is to make sure we do understand what we're talking about and make sure that we have talked about it amongst ourselves and come to a consensus. We have a tremendous group with a tremendous discipline and a tremendous respect for our kids in Canada. And so asking me if I'm going to vote for it, we've already decided amongst ourselves largely do what we think is right, and I think I'll do what is right when we come to that point today. But I would encourage you folks to do what you think is right, because this is a government piece of legislation that the government puts forward. That's right. And it's not for us to make that decision.
Yeah.
I saw a number of senators rising. First, Senator Rain. I saw Senator Omidvar. Do you have a question, Senator Omidvar?
Thank you, Chair. My questions have been asked and answered. I won't take up the honourable senator's time.
Ms. Monsillon?
I have a question for Senator Smith, if he agrees. It's about what you just said regarding your group. What I wanted to say, I don't know if you listened to the speeches made by the senators on this side of the House. We're not in opposition, and we're not for the government either. Many comments were made regarding the fact that there are concerns in the way the legislation is currently presented. And all the senators who spoke have raised their concerns. And what we want is for all these concerns, the age, packaging, comestibles, edibles rather, we want all of that to be studied in committee. So, you seem to be saying that you do not want this bill to be studied in committee. How do you want this bill to be analyzed in a more in-depth fashion with witnesses if we don't send it to committee? I did not suggest anything. What I suggested is that the government's obligation is to promote and support the police and government laws. Our role as opposition is to criticize and analyze. And like Mr. Harder, I stated that or who I really respect, I said that we're going to evaluate this and we're going to play our role. Saying that I don't think something is a good idea doesn't mean that I'm suggesting that it's your obligation as a group, as a parliamentary group. I think you have to make your own decision, because we are going to make our own choice about what we're going to do ourselves. That's what I wanted to say. Senator Moncion, just a clarification. When you say our group, each senator who is an independent senator makes his or her own decision, and these are not group decisions, whatever you may think about that. But the question is, to what extent are we going to be able to move this bill forward, in your opinion? That's the challenge of how the Prime Minister structured your group, which is that on some points you need to take decisions. Yes, you're independent, but as a group, there is a track record of voting patterns. And I think that shows what's really going on. And I don't want to have a conflict, because I respect you. You are very competent in all of your fields of action. But we are very proud of our way of doing things when it comes to how we handle the Westminster system. We are not consultants. We are a group that takes decisions, and we only make decisions after a healthy discussion between ourselves.
Senator, take another question.
I'm ready for a nap. Go ahead, yes. Sir.
No, because as an independent senator, we all are independent senators. Here, here. The only way you could be dismissed from this chamber is to be convicted of a crime, an indictable crime. But we are independent, and I pride myself on my independence. And as an independent, conservative-thinking senator, I have a question for you, and that is, because you have a lot of experience in business, I understand that when a product is a legal product for sale in our country, that comes with it, I think according to our Constitution and the freedom of speech, the right to market and promote that product. And my understanding also is that most businesses work by a bottom line, where the whole idea of a business is to make money, and it's basically to sell a product at a profit and increase your market share and drive value to the shareholders, even if they're in an offshore country. But so I don't understand how, if we are going to go from a product that is not legal for sale to one that is legal for sale, do you think there's any possibility that there will be less of that product sold?
Senator Smith.
Well, if you're talking, there's two factors. What will the legal market be for marijuana? If you look at the Canopy, and the president of Canopy was, after the first visit that Senator Dean set up, was very eloquent when he started talking about his market cap and the expected market cap as his business was going to grow. As a legal producer, this market will grow significantly. Is the number, it's presently the illegal market in Canada, if I understand correctly, is about $7 billion a year. So the legal market will be a multiple of that market, right? So there's two elements. There's the legal sales and the increase of market cap. And secondly, in the illegal market, will that legal market continue? My sense is, and I don't have statistics in front of me, but I would guess that that illegal market will continue. And will it thrive? I would suggest to you it will thrive, and possibly it may thrive on people who are underage acquiring that product. And so this, again, we have to look at what we're doing to see how this whole project is going to advance with the legal market and the illegal market. And don't forget the people that have invested into the companies, what is it? Half of the 86 companies that have investment is from offshore money, and offshore money comes through in many situations, not only the wealthy people in our country and other countries, but through organized crime. So there's all sorts of issues that are direct and indirect that affect legal sales and potentially illegal sales.
Senator Pratt.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. If I understand correctly the Leader of the Opposition's position, when he says that the federal government should not pass the buck for 5 grams and less for youth, what that means is that the federal government should throw the criminal code with its full weight for young people who have 5 grams and less. Well, that's what this means. Well, that's what the bill says, only says that for 5 grams and less, the federal government would not sanction with a crime young people. That's all what the bill says, and therefore what the provinces can do and have done is say that the provincial law would apply for those young people. So are you in favor of having crimes for young people 12 to 17 for 5 grams or less? Are you in favor of that?
Senator Smith.
So if you could just repeat your question, because there was quite a little noise. Just the last 2 seconds, Senator Pratt, would be helpful.
Of young people 12 to 17, 5 grams or less of marijuana being charged with a crime.
Of course, I think part of the motivation that you bring the question up with is your perception of past governments and some of the tough on crime issues that were brought up. What I would suggest, because it is a question that is important, is that we thoroughly think through some of the issues that may be nebulous or gray areas with this new legislation with young people. Obviously, there has been a move over time to try to make sure that we don't penalize young people unfairly. So I wouldn't appreciate having words trying to be put in my mouth as to whether I think criminalization and increasing criminal penalties is the answer. I think the real answer is making sure that whatever we do with implementing the policies surrounding legalization, we think through and we utilize every element possible to make sure that we have fairness. And one thing you haven't asked me any questions on, which is something that bothers me, because on the Finance Committee, is that when we dealt with Indigenous, the community, is that the Indigenous community, to me, is not being served, just from what I hear from Senator Patterson, in that these poor folks are in remote areas with no infrastructure, with no support structure, with a not a strong police force, and have to use RCMP and outside people. We need to make sure that these people who are potentially the most threatened people are going to be taken care of, the young people. Because we saw those young kids come in here and saw the pride in their eyes when they're standing up. But think about the kids that are out in the boondocks that don't have that opportunity that those kids had that we had up here. We have to start to take action and stop talking and get the damn things done so that we can have results. We need to have results, but it has to be action. Most of our arguments based on a lot of talk, no action. And look at the track record, Senator Pratt. 2.5 years, lots of promises, no results. My life has always been one thing: don't make more promises that you can. Don't talk about promises, talk about results. And in my life, it's helped me, and hopefully for us as a group, we can find some ways to make sure, and I think our group does a great job, everybody involved, but let's focus on what we need to do to get results.
Senator Pratt?
I'm not questioning your record, Senator Smith, you know that. My only question was, since the bill regarding youth and possession of 5 grams and less of cannabis, all the bill does is say that it would not be a crime to possess 5 grams or less for these youth. Therefore, by suggesting that the federal government should do something for these young people, do something, what is it that you suggest the federal government should do?
Make sure that any confusion that could exist with the drug and with children, or sorry, young people between certain age, let's make sure we clarify it and we set up the best possible situation or rule so that there isn't people falling into traps that could be really harmful to them and their future. That's what I'm really saying. If there's any confusion, let's identify it, let's fix the problem, and let's stop talking about, all the potential things that could happen. Let's fix the problem now. Let's do it now. And that's the problem that many of us have with this legislation. Too many holes.
Senator Eaton.
Leader, are you aware, and I'm going to follow on Senator Pratt's question about the 5 grams that are allowed to a person of 18 and younger. Are you aware, and I've asked this question at Legal and Constitutional, and they do admit, yes, somebody could have 5 joints, 6 joints in their pocket, and Senator Pratt saying, well, we don't want to put the full force of the law, but are you aware that we could choose to have 0 tolerance for anybody under 18? And we could also use decriminalize. So anybody caught with 5 grams or less could be a finable offense and decriminalize that little section. But they just, I found, and perhaps you have read the bill differently, I found them to be unaware, unthought through. And also, have you thought about, if I'm 17, where am I going to buy it? Because I can't buy it legally. So where am I going to get it?
Well, Senator Eaton, I had the opportunity of speaking to l'Association des Parents du Québec and Canada, and it was fascinating. Just 2 points that I might think you might find interesting. The ladies that I spoke with, who were the heads, said the vast majority of parents that they speak with are not up to speed, not aware of what's going on. Because one of the elements that they want to protect children, young children, is they don't want any pot sold within 1 kilometer of the schools and the school zones. And I just asked a simple question. I said, how will you prevent that without having enforcement nearby to make sure? And they said, well, the SAQ people told us that we won't set up within 1 kilometer of your facility. I said, well, I'm not sure that any of these kids who are in primary school or secondary school are going to go to an SAQ to buy it. But there seems to be a bit of a lack of understanding of what parameters could exist. My only point, and I said it to Senator Pratt without trying to be obnoxious, is that if there are holes or problems and we can get things done up front, I just think it makes it better to do things in front of the action as opposed to behind the action. Because what happens when things aren't done up front, and I know I'm realistic, even in business we had similar issues. You look back and do an audit, a post-mortem on a project, you say, yeah, we could have done this better, we could have done this better, but what if there's 5 or 6 things that we can do better right now? Let's do it now.
Roman Bar.
So I do have a question now, Senator Smith. I will take up a little bit more of your time. I think some of the issues you raised are issues I'm concerned about, many of us are concerned about: age limits, potency levels, interaction with other substances. But you've posed these questions, and the place that we get the answers to these questions are in committee, where we hear from witnesses, where we hear from stakeholders, and we hear from experts. And in fact, you were part of the arrangement that sent the bill already to Aboriginal Affairs, to Legal, to Foreign Affairs, and maybe some others, I'm not remembering. So I'm a little confused by the yin and yang here. You know, you've sent this here, but you're blocking it here. You're posing questions. We know we can get, well, you have said that you will be voting against sending it to committee. Right. I heard that. So perhaps you could clarify that for me, that the confusion in my mind, if you want answers to these questions, very sensible, important questions, isn't committee the right place to do it?
I have the greatest respect for you, and I met you very early in your entrance into the Senate. Honestly, I don't remember saying anything to the fact that I was voting against sending this to committee. What I did say was in my discussions with the leader of the government representative, I suggested that we're not the ones who have to get your work done for you. What we're trying to do is be, no, but seriously, because people are saying we're going to block this. Well, what we're saying is we're looking at this, we've done a lot of study, whatever decision we come up with, we have independent people who can do what they want, because we'll ask them, what should we do? And so when we ask our folks, what should we do? And our folks tell us, we listen, because we have that discipline within our group, because we work together to come to a conclusion. But I never said what we were going to do. What I did say, and I said it to the media, because I'm tired of people saying, you know, you're trying to block this, and wait a sec. What we're trying to do is our jobs. But what happens if we feel that there are enough significant issues involved that we may not want to support something? Is that are we being the obstructionist people? No. What it is if the government has a program and a plan, it's up to the government to get its plan through. We haven't changed. We haven't changed this great group of people yet to be a bunch of consultants. Okay? And I don't have a problem with consultants. What I do have a problem with is people who feel they're in a position where there has to be some form of coordination and teamwork to get to a conclusion with whatever you do. We've got that. This is what I think you folks are trying to strive to create. You have Senator Wu, Senator Saint-Germain? Okay. Well, if it's not that, that's whatever you want to have is what you're going to have. I'm just telling you what we have. So please do not tell us that we're being obstructionists and we're not doing our job. We are doing our job. We've worked very hard. Claude Carignan has worked very hard. He's got 800 articles. They've been doing research. He's been explaining as our critic what we're going to do. We have a strategy amongst our leadership group. We have everybody involved. We have social media people that are doing a great job. But hey, guys, don't try and say to us, we're the ones that are blocking things. You're the ones that have to get it done. And Senator Harder and myself understand that. Well, Senator Lankin, I have the greatest respect for you. You and I sat together and talked. I'm not pointing at anybody. I'm sorry. I'm sorry. I should have cut my hand off. It's just that I went for a passy and I did a move, but no, I'm not. But I think it comes to the point where it's up to you folks to make your own choice. And we'll make our choice too, because we have the right to make our choice.